everyone, and welcome to the Friday, September 17th edition of On Iowa Politics. This week on the podcast, Redistricting. We get our first look at the maps, a couple of new Secretary of State candidates, and Marinette Miller Meeks catches some attention for a tweet. Hello, everyone. I'm Aaron Murphy, the Des Moines bureau chief for Lee Enterprises, and clearly I haven't had enough coffee yet. With me today are Amie Rivers of the Waterloo-Cedar Courier. Good morning, Amie.
Good morning, Erin.
Tom Barton of the Quad City Times. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning.
And Gazette columnist Todd Dorman. Good morning, Todd.
Good morning.
As a reminder, you can subscribe to the On Iowa Politics podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you happen to find your favorite podcasts. First up this week, redistricting. The long-awaited day was finally here yesterday, Thursday, depending on when you're listening to this podcast. We got our first look at the first proposal for new political boundaries for Iowa for the next 10 years. Plenty of intrigue, build up, and we now have an idea of what our political boundaries could look like for the next 10 years. Some interesting results in the congressional maps, some interesting pairings in the Statehouse maps, a lot to unpack here. But before we go that far, Todd, I want to start with you because we're about to have a 5, 10, however long minutes we spend on this topic here discussion that, if we're being to be honest, could be all for naught. So let's start with the big question first before we dive into the details. Based on what you saw of the maps and what you've heard out there, on social media and on any legislators you've had a chance to talk to yet, are these maps going to get approved, or are we already looking at round two?
Well, it's at first glance, you might think that this is the sort of map Republicans wouldn't go for it. I mean, it creates a a much more democratic first district that includes Lynn County and Johnson County, Cedar Rapids and Iowa City, and Scott County, Davenport. A more Republican second district, in the second, that losing Cedar Rapids. They still have Waterloo and Dubuque, but Dubuque has been trending less favorably for Democrats. The fourth district is huge. It's almost half the counties in the state, which tells you a little bit about the loss of population in rural areas. And then you've got the third district that includes Polk County, and then a lot of sort of more sparsely populated counties in south central Iowa, which looks like it might, if Des Moines dominates that district, it could be a good district for Democrats. So you've only got 2 of the 4 that are pretty sure for Republicans. And then you've got this problem that, what is it, like, are there 54 incumbents thrown together, or is that high, something like?
Yeah,
I mean, like almost.
I've heard upper 50s to even low 60s. Some.
Yeah, it's
it's a lot.
Yeah. So legislators don't like that. Don't like having to be, it's one thing if you're with another party incumbent, but a lot of these are, multiple incumbents from the same party living in the same district. And do you really want to move for a job that pays, I forget how much it pays now, but it's supposedly part-time, citizen lawmakers. So, yeah, so there's all of those strikes against it. But then, you look at how the maps are shaped, how the population is shaped. I mean, it's inevitable that you're going to have more districts in cities and urban areas that are growing, and in rural areas you're just going to have bigger districts because the population is declining. So maybe you turn down the first map and you end up with a worse map. The second map could be worse. I mean, it could throw more incumbents together. I don't know that you're going to be able to avoid the reality of where the population is in the state and where it's not. And so, I mean, they may conclude that they don't want to take that risk and surprise us and go ahead and approve this map and then, get on with the consequences. I mean, after all, Republicans are in a great political position regardless of what the map looks like. So I don't know how much, how much better it can get for them, and it could get worse.
Yeah, that's such a great point that, it might be easy to fall into a line of thinking, well, we don't like this, so scratch it and let's see what the next one looks like. Because that's exactly right. The next one, there's no guarantee that they're going to like the next one even more. and the Senate could say, well, the Republicans with their majorities can just push it to the third map and then amend it. But there, even with that, there's dangers. First of all, that's a political calculation that could backfire on them because of the wide popularity of Iowa's bipartisan nature of its process. But it's also, I think it's important to note, and check me if I'm wrong on this, Todd, but it's not like, when you say Republicans can amend that third proposal, it's not like they can just start taking their pencil and drawing, some of the crazy gerrymandered maps that we see in other states. They still have to play within a certain set of rules that are established throughout this whole process, right? It's not like they can just say, okay, we're going to amend that map and draw all these districts any way we want. So they have some constraints even on that third step in the process, as I understand it anyways.
Yeah. I mean, maybe, there are people that are like, well, they could draw the congressional maps, themselves, but I mean, they care about their districts first, and they care about the legislature first. And so, I mean, it could get to a third map. I mean, maybe that's the plan all along, that they keep saying that, they keep pledging that they're going to abide by the process. Well, the process includes this third map that the legislature can draw itself. So that doesn't really tell us that they're not thinking about that. But so yeah, I mean, it's a guess, and we'll see. As we have these public hearings, and as people look more closely at these maps, we may hear more on, what they plan to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's get some reaction from some other areas. Amie, with you over there in the Waterloo area, tell us what you heard from state legislators, especially, and what they saw and liked or didn't like with these maps.
Yeah, I mean, Bill Dotzler came out and he was like, "This map is terrible, but it's the best one we've got." Like, obviously he's in the minority party, but at the same time, he's right. If the Democrats can, get this map, that probably is their best case scenario. I think, when I spoke with Bob Kressig, he was, more pragmatic about it. We'll see how it goes. We'll see how the process goes. And even the Republicans I spoke to, Chad Ingalls, whose district has changed wildly. It used to be a lot of Buchanan County and a fair.
So, someone's at Todd's door. the FedEx guy just showed up. Go ahead, Amie.
Well, and basically you've got these districts like Chad Ingalls district, where it's Fayette County and part of Buchanan County, and now he's looking at the other part of Fayette County. He still lives within that part, but now he's looking at two other counties that he wouldn't have even served, that basically creates an open district for him. So you've got the problem, yes, of two incumbents that are going to be battling in several districts, which of course happens. John Deeth tweeted yesterday, that happens quite often,
right.
That you're going to have dozens of districts that are now going to be like facing each other. On the other hand, you've got these open seats now where, people were used to being represented by somebody that now no longer lives there. And of course, you're going to have that on the congressional side too. So let's not forget that while we're also doing these House and Senate maps, the congressional districts have changed pretty quickly. So I think even the Republicans are thinking, let's just see how we shake out with the congressional districts. Like, those are sort of top of mind, and we want to make sure we get those right, and then everything else will just shake out from there. But I'm getting the sense that most people are taking a wait and see approach, which either means they don't think this map is going to survive, or they really want to get a better sense of it and dive into it deeper and talk to their colleagues.
Yeah. Tom, how about over there? I know the Quad Cities area had one district in particular that brought 3 current incumbents into the same district. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So the new legislative maps had some, I guess, unexpected surprises for area lawmakers here Thursday. So the map would throw together state senators Jim Lycum, a Democrat, Robbie Smith, and Mark Lofgren, Republicans. They're all thrown into the same district. And so the proposed new 44th Senate District, which runs from the eastern part of Davenport all the way into Muscatine, again, would encompass all three of those lawmakers. Lycum right now lives on the west side of Davenport, and like I said, is a Democrat. Smith lives on the east side of Davenport, it's a Republican, and then you've got Lofgren, or excuse me, Smith is a Republican, and then Lofgren, who lives in Muscatine, also a Republican. And then, meanwhile, state representatives Monica Kurth and Cindy Winkler, both Democrats who live in the western part of Davenport, would also be put into into the same newly drawn House district.
Yeah, so and that's happening obviously all over, and it's going to be interesting to see how much that bothers these state legislators. Who, again, these are the folks who are going to have to vote on these maps up or down. So it's important to keep in mind these state house boundaries and what state legislators think of them, because ultimately that's their jobs and their boundaries. As we noted, somewhere in the range of mid to high 50s, maybe even low 60s of number of, that's almost a third of the, or maybe even more than a third of the entire legislature that got drawn together. Any number of it is normal, as Amie alluded to, that's going to happen regardless. You're going to have some of that, maybe even a lot of that. But is this too much for them to stomach? Maybe between that and some partisan concerns Republicans may have, maybe that'll be enough to nosedive this first round of maps. But as Todd said, one of the things they'll have to consider and weigh is there's no guarantee that the second round gets any better. I wanted to talk a little bit more real quick about those congressional maps too, though, especially those first and second districts. So interesting to me. And Dave Wasserman, the national kind of political reporter, did some quick analysis and ran the 2020 presidential election numbers and applied them to the new congressional maps and basically what they did. And I offer the caveat here that, that's just one way to analyze these. We can look at voter registration numbers, the new districts, congressional voting patterns, blah, blah, but for just the sake of this argument right now, based on those Trump-Biden voting numbers, what this new map essentially kind of did was took the first, second, and third are all pretty balanced right now, pretty close districts, usually pretty competitive. And the third would remain so, but the first and second would get steered in opposite directions pretty significantly. The first would get pretty significantly more Democratic, as Todd noted, with Iowa City and Cedar Rapids getting lumped together. And then the second district would get a pretty significantly more Republican. So it's interesting to me. I guess it'll be interesting for the partisans out there. Are you comfortable with having two competitive congressional districts in the first and second, where any given year you could possibly go 2-0, but also possibly go 0-2? Or do you kind of like what they both lean a different way? Most years we're going to get one and they're going to get the other, and I'm okay with that. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see what the reaction is to that out there as well. And again, we're just looking at presidential numbers. That's a very simplistic way to look at this too.
Well, and one interesting connection between the legislative districts and this congressional situation is Liz Mathis is now in a district with Todd Taylor, if this were approved. And maybe Erin, I don't remember exactly what the formula is for who has to face re-election. And I mean, if you've got multiple incumbents in a district and they all plan to run, that would happen next year. I don't know if everybody, if all those Senate seats have to be up next year, or if you're in a district by yourself, you don't have to face re-election. I'm not sure about those rules, but so Mathis, her calculation was, I'm in the middle of my 4-year Senate term. I'm going to run for Congress. If I lose, I can go back to the Senate. Now the situation has changed a little bit, and just to illustrate the craziness of how the population is affecting. I mean, we've got there are 4. Well, this new Senate District here, Senate District 49 is massive. It takes in the rural areas, rural and suburban areas, basically all around Cedar Rapids and Iowa City, so in Lynn and Johnson counties. And right now, that territory is represented by 4 lawmakers. It's, Kevin Kinney, Todd Taylor, Zach Walls, and Dan Zumbaugh. Zumbaugh is now up in 48 with 2 other incumbents to the north of us. And now in this massive new district that I talked about, the double donut hole, Todd Taylor is the only senator that lives in it.
Amazing.
So it's like, yeah, I mean, I don't know, how they redraw that to be, because the population just is what it is.
Right. And then honestly, and that's part of the process anyways, right? I mean, that's the reason we do this, is population shifts, and we need to change our representation based on where people are, right? And that's part of the reason we do this every 10 years. So it seems like chaos, but it's, to a certain degree, it's intentional chaos, right? I mean, it's
yeah, and you've seen big shifts, especially in suburban areas. You've seen,
right.
I mean, where I live in Marion, population grew 19% over the last decade. So those are gonna make a difference. North Liberty, western suburbs of Des Moines. I mean, that's representation that's going to be taken from the rural areas. I mean, that's just, you're going to end up, like I say, big rural districts, lots of urban suburban districts.
Yep.
You mentioned Liz Mathis. I would also note that the new boundaries would potentially shake up the 2022 race for the Iowa's 2nd congressional district. So Iowa City Democrat and State Representative Christina Bohannon announced last month a challenge to Miller Meeks in Iowa's 2nd district, but under the new maps, Iowa City would be drawn into Iowa's 1st district, not the 2nd. Bohannon hasn't publicly commented on the new maps and whether that would change her candidacy. And it's also worth noting, though, that according to guidance from the Iowa Secretary of State, congressional candidates do not technically need to live in the district they're running for. They just need to be residents of the state. But I think it will be interesting. Bohannon announced her candidacy, assuming that, she would have a matchup against Miller Meeks, freshman Republican congresswoman who, won that seat in the 2020 election by just a mere 6 votes. Mm-hmm. Now, if this, map holds up as proposed, she would face a matchup against Ashley Hinson.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
And you've got Mathis and Bohannon in the 1st district, and I've heard people say that they would expect maybe Hinson to move into the 2nd, like you say, and it's a better Republican district. If whoever won that primary would be pretty well positioned to win.
But
then what do Mathis and Bohannon do? I mean, that's the other question. Mathis had a statement yesterday that seemed to indicate that she was saying, whatever happens, I'll be looking forward to meet the people in the, new parts of the district. So I don't think she has any plans on moving any place.
Yeah, but if Hinson moves into the 2nd district, then you have a potential primary with her and Miller Meeks, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yep.
Because
unless Miller Meeks moves into the 3rd.
Yeah, and
she's close to that there, and I guess in Ottumwa, isn't she?
Moved to Des Moines.
Yeah, Wapello County. Yeah, she is close, but I don't know. Personally, I guess I don't necessarily see that happening. I don't know, given how things went for her in the 2020 election. I don't know the willingness there to want to run in a 1st district that now becomes even more Democratic, picking up or lumping together Iowa City, Cedar Rapids, and Davenport, and shedding a lot of those rural counties to the west that, helped boost her, helped her, get over the finish line, albeit just barely over Democrat Rita Hart last year.
Right. Yeah. No, I wondered if she'd move west and go to the 3rd and rather take on Cindy Axney than face Ashley Hinson in a primary. I don't know. I don't know. James Lynch, our colleague who couldn't be here with us this week, he joked last night that if these maps hold, the biggest winners might be realtors across Iowa. So
Yeah. Yeah, Zillow running slow on the
right. And the moving
It's
companies. It'll be interesting, needless to say. And as I said at the top, but we just talked for 15 minutes, and it could be about maps that have no future, and we'll have to come back and talk about a different set of maps on a future on Iowa politics. But hey, that wouldn't be so bad, right? That'd give us something to talk about. That's right. It's always good to have something to do. So we'll obviously watch this, and the special, we've got listening sessions in the meantime, and the special session isn't until October 5th. So we've got a few weeks before we even know the fate of these maps and whether there's another round coming or whether that's it. We'll obviously cover that on future episodes of the podcast.
It'll be a very special session. Very special.
I'm personally, as someone who's going to have to cover it, I'm hoping it's the baseline minimum for a special session, and no extra special, no very special, just a nice special session, please. Can that be it? That's what my fingers are crossed for. This week we got our first Secretary of State candidates to challenge Republican incumbent Paul Pate. A couple of Democrats made their announcement, and a couple of county auditors. In Clinton County, Eric Van Lanker, and in Lynn County, Joel Miller. Tom, I want to ask you first how familiar you are, and because I'm not at all, with Clinton County Auditor Eric Van Lanker. Lynn County Auditor Joel Miller, I'm a little more familiar with because he's, spoken up at certain times on certain issues around elections. But Mr. Van Lanker, I'm not as familiar with. Is there anything you know about him from over there or can tell us about?
Very little, unfortunately. I guess what I can say is that he has been somewhat vocal and outspoken about the recent changes that state lawmakers made, the myriad changes that they made to the state's election laws, and how that will impact county election officials and county auditors in conducting elections going forward. And he also served as president of the Iowa State Association of County Auditors, I think back in 2014. But, he's been very vocal and very critical of Republican state lawmakers and the governor who signed that legislation into law, and will take effect for the city and school elections this fall. Talking about how this could potentially restrict access to the ballot box. Shortening the early voting window. Placing some added restrictions on who and how people can return absentee ballots, shortening the window for requesting and, turning in an absentee ballot. In his statement announcing his candidacy, he talks about how Iowans have never needed a voting advocate more than they do at this moment. So yeah, I guess that's what I can say about Eric Van Lanker.
No, that's good. That's more than I would have been able to. So that's interesting, and certainly that message will play well in the Democratic primary. Right. Speaking of which he'll have to face Joel Miller. And Todd, he's from your neck of the woods there. Now, Joel Miller, for those of us who follow these kinds of things super closely, this announcement surprises approximately none of us, right? I mean, this was pretty easy to see coming.
Yeah, he had been talking about doing this for a while and had been making some moves. And if you ask me if I know anything about Joel Miller, I think we'd probably need to have a separate podcast on all the news that Joel Miller has made during his 14 years as auditor. He tried to, back in 2010, he tried to hire a deputy auditor who could do some actual auditing of county finances, and the supervisors wouldn't let him do it, and so he went to court. It was a 4-year legal battle. In the middle of that, one of his former employees, who was then the construction manager for the county, who had one of the great political names, Garth Fagerbaki, ran against
Nice.
him, and Miller walloped him. And then
Oh, poor Garth.
I know, and a few weeks, but the story ended happily for Garth, because not long after the election, the supervisors voted to give about half of Miller's duties to Fagerbaki as the like they made him the facilities manager. So he didn't win, but he got a lot of the duties that the auditor was supposed to take care of. And he's tangled with the board of supervisors a lot. He in 2016, I think it was, he handily defeated a Democratic challenger in the primary that was backed by pretty much every Democratic county elected official. And then in the general election, that primary opponent went to vote absentee in person at the auditor's office, took the ballot away from the booth and went down the hallway and filled it out. And Miller tried to have him arrested for election misconduct.
Wow.
And then the county attorney wouldn't charge, and so then there was, but he's at his best sort of when he's kind of fighting for greater transparency and more participation in voting, and he has fought those fights, and I think generally that's been good. But when he gets a little bit petty and goes after his former opponents and tries to exact some revenge sometimes over minor matters, that's kind of the downside. But I think he'll be a decent candidate. I don't know who will come out of that primary. I haven't seen the Clinton auditor and don't know much about him, like Erin said. But yeah, I mean, well, and Miller was also one of the rogue auditors last year who sent out the filled in absentee ballot request forms. So maybe he get one. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say and we don't know. I mean, there could be others still filing into this primary too. So,
yeah. Well, and if Miller wins, Peyton Miller they're both Lynn County guys, and they know each other pretty well. And I don't detect a lot of goodwill. So that could be an interesting general election, knowing that they're both personalities who are pretty willing to throw a punch.
Yeah. So speaking of Paul Pate, Amie, I'll put you on the spot here. Paul Pate's waiting on the other side of this primary next year, and obviously, I think it's safe to say, as Tom and Todd both brought up, talking about the candidates in their areas, that Paul Pate's going to hear about that new election bill in that campaign. I'm curious if you have any hunch and sense from just how upset people in general, voters are about that new law. Pate survived voter ID 4 years ago against Deidre DeGere. The voter ID had been implemented at that point, and Pate still won that reelection. Does he survive this one too, or is this a bigger deal? Is this one going to hurt Paul Pate regardless of who he's going up against next year?
I think it'll be interesting. He had a decent answer for the voter ID people that were like, what about the people that can't get voter ID? And that answer was, we will personally at our expense mail an ID card to everyone. So that did sort of placate a lot of people. And I think, they took that in good faith. And honestly, there weren't a ton of people that had come out afterwards and said, I wasn't able to vote. Although those people generally aren't the kind of people that come to newspapers and tell them I wasn't able to vote too. So there's that. I think it'll really depend on this election. If you're seeing a lot of long lines, if you're seeing people that are missing deadlines in mass, if you're seeing people in nursing homes that can't get absentee ballots in time, things like that will rile up people. And I think that might turn the tide against him. But if it all goes off without a hitch, maybe it's just another thing in the background that we say, oh, it's fine. It didn't bother us.
Yeah. And that's a good point. And voter ID too is one of those issues that for all the complaints that people who are against those kinds of laws have, and I certainly understand where they're coming from. When you kind of look at public polling numbers, usually voter ID does okay. In general, people out there are fine with being required to have an ID. to vote. Now, when you talk about making voting harder in some cases, and I know Republicans will argue that they didn't, but the facts are very clear that they very much did in certain cases. So when you talk about making voting a little harder, having to go through maybe one more hoop, not having more early voting options, if that starts to impact people's ability to get a ballot cast, then I agree. Then and if that starts to show up in elections, then that may make a little more difference. We'll see, and we'll see if any other Democrats announce. Before we go this week, one more thing to talk about. Speaking of Marionette Miller Meeks and the impact of the new maps on her, she was in the news this week for another reason when she retweeted a satirical news account, a news story that suggested President Biden, again satirically, was withholding VA benefits from veterans who were unvaccinated. Tom, you wrote about that and the kerfuffle that followed, and maybe what was most interesting to me, which was that the Miller Meeks camp did not back down from that as well. And in fact, in many ways, they doubled down on that. So tell us about that, Tom.
Yeah, that was also surprising to me as well, that the Miller Meeks campaign decided to double down on that. And it's worth noting that Miller Meeks is an ophthalmologist. She's a physician, but maybe more importantly, she's also a member of the House Committee on Veterans Affairs, as well as the House Select Committee on COVID-19. So, one would think then that, she would be, privy to information and, would have received some sort of notification, or again, had access to information to know whether the Biden administration, had made such a move or issued any sort of direction to the VA related to health benefits for unvaccinated veterans. The other thing worth pointing out is that the satirical website, the story that she retweeted, the satirical news website includes the following disclaimer on its site: everything on this website is made up. Don't rely on anything said here. So it's fairly clear that this is a satirical news website, and it was fairly clear if you read the story that that it was probably not above board, right? There were enough red flags in how the story was written and some of the made up quotes that it included and attributed to President Biden that you would be like, okay, something's wrong here. But
So
yeah.
Tom, if I can interject, then maybe the worst news out of all this is that Marionette Miller Meeks is one of our industry's despised news consumers. She just read the headline and didn't read the story.
Absolutely right.
Oh no.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the way that it seemed, or the way that it came off. And so, yeah, you mentioned that she kind of doubled down. So in a statement, she acknowledged sharing and retweeting the fake news article. And in her retweet, she added that, if true, this is insane. But in her statement, responding to criticisms about sharing this fake news account, she went on to say that the story and website is obviously satire, but that it makes a powerful point. President Biden's executive orders about COVID-19 have been classic examples of government overreach, and these days the unbelievable has become reality. So she notes that she goes, well, I had this caveat in my tweet saying, if true, this is insane. But then in her statement acknowledges that, oh yeah, the story and website is obviously satire. And nothing in Miller Meek's tweet sharing the fictional story, however, indicates that it's satirical, and instead insinuates that it might be true. But then later coming out and saying, "Oh no, I knew it was fake."
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I think you covered it well. I don't know that there's not much more to add there, other than, again, I'm disappointed that it just struck me that just read the headline. Come on, folks, give us the clicks,
Well,
read the story too, and then all this could have been avoided.
What's even sadder about it is that she got in this same kind of trouble before when she was the director of the Department of Public Health. She spoke at the World Food Prize and said that Mountain Dew was the #1 item bought by people on food assistance. And afterwards, people were like, "Where did you get that?" And it turned out she'd seen it somewhere on the internet, couldn't remember where, couldn't account for it, and it turned out to be wrong. That I don't think they keep track of things at that granular level, and second, that milk or something was actually the top thing bought. So yeah, I guess she didn't learn much from that experience, that everything you see online isn't, and you have a responsibility as someone who is an opinion leader to not tweet just lies.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
you can just start with that. That's kind of a basic.
we're waging this very real war with misinformation. It'd be nice if we didn't have to worry about satire accidentally slipping in there too.
No, that's the hard thing about satire, is the people reading it have to be smart enough to know that it's satire. So that's always difficult.
And there's some terrible satire websites out there too that are written poorly as well.
Right.
Well, and the other thing is, and this is your depressing thought for the day, is we're kind of at a point in the world and our country right now where satire it's hard to tell the difference between satire and reality.
There are definitely times where I see an Onion article. Well, actually, I take it back. I see a real news article, and I think it's an Onion article, right?
Yeah, exactly. So on that happy thought, everyone, have a great weekend. That's it for this week's edition of On Iowa Politics. Thank you for listening. We hope it was worth your time and that we didn't leave you on too much of a downer note there. If you do still like the show, we appreciate it. Subscribe and tell a friend. And you can send fan mail and your therapist bills to podcasts@thegazette.com. Don't forget the work of everyone you heard today can be found on the pages and websites of the Quad City Times, Waterloo-Cedar-Falls Courier, Sioux City Journal, Mason City Globe Gazette, Muscatine Journal, Council Bluffs Daily Nonpareil, and Cedar Rapids Gazette. Basically, all the big papers in Iowa except for a few that shall not be named. Paleo will play us out this weekend. If you know a talented band or Iowa musician who should be featured on our show, send us a sound file. For Amie, Todd, Tom, and our producer, Steven, I'm Erin Murphy. Thanks for listening.
Along the side of the bow, lucky waves will evolve into clouds who stir and spill on the wind, whipped moon like a cuticle rune, filed away and never read by the wind in her swoon for her blue barren womb. Every kiss was her wish for rain, but the rain would go mad, become snow with a laugh. A long, long island sound where the icebergs conspire, just like barbs on a wire. A long, long island, a long, long island, a long, long island sound. Do I bring out the worst in the oceans? Why do the waves spell out your name? A long, long island, a long, long island, a long, long island sound. And our cats will escape. They will go look for their mates. A long, long island sound where the skies are all scraped by our Empire State. A long, long island, a long